lost in another's arms. The air in Barcelona smelled of salt and citrus, a blend of the ocean breeze and freshly squeezed oranges from the vendors along La Rambla. Emma inhaled deeply, letting the foreignness of it settle in her chest. This was her escape. After years of feeling stuck in the same monotonous cycle, waking up beside the same man, having the same conversations, feeling the same dull ache of something missing, she needed this. She needed space to breathe, to rediscover who she was before she became just another half of a couple. Alex, her boyfriend of 5 years, had encouraged the trip. "It'll be good for you," he had said, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. They both knew things had been fading, but neither wanted to be the one to admit it aloud. Emma told herself she was here to explore, to find herself, but deep down, she feared that what she might find was the truth she had been avoiding. She wasn't sure she wanted to go back. That was before she met Lucas. She found him by accident, tucked away in a hidden cafe down a narrow alley near the Gothic Quarter. He had been adjusting his camera, trying to capture the perfect shot of the way the afternoon light danced through the wrought iron balcony above. His focus was magnetic, his presence even more so. When he noticed her watching, he smiled, and it felt like an invitation. Lucas was different, effortlessly confident, impossibly charming, and fluent in the language of the city in a way that made her feel as if she had never truly seen it before. He took her to places she would have never found on her own. Secret rooftops with breathtaking views, underground jazz bars where the music pulsed like a heartbeat, and quiet bookshops filled with stories left unread. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to deny what was happening between them. It wasn't just his touch when he guided her through crowded streets or the way his gaze lingered a little too long. It was in the way he made her feel alive, unpredictable, and unbound for the first time in years. And yet, something about him remained just out of reach. Lucas avoided personal questions, deflecting with teasing remarks or changing the subject altogether. Some nights, he would disappear without explanation, only to return the next day with a casual smile and no answers. It wasn't until she stumbled upon an old photograph in his apartment, Lucas with his arm around a woman who looked strikingly like her, that she realized there was more to him than he let on. She confronted him, but his reaction was unreadable. "She was someone I used to know," he said vaguely, the usual lightness in his voice absent. "It's complicated." So was she. The guilt gnawed at her. Every text from Alex felt like a weight pressing against her ribs. She had convinced herself this trip was about finding clarity, but instead, she had found chaos. And now, that chaos was about to get worse. Alex was coming to Barcelona. She had woken up to his message that morning. "Surprise. I booked a flight. Can't wait to see you." Her stomach twisted. The excitement in his words felt foreign, distant, like a life that no longer belonged to her. She wasn't ready. Not to see him. Not to face what she had done. Not to decide. That night, as she stood on a balcony overlooking the city, Lucas beside her, she felt the storm brewing inside her. "What do I do?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Lucas didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "That depends," he finally said, voice low. Emma stared at Lucas, his question hanging in the air like a challenge she wasn't ready to face. Did she want to go back? Back to the life that had started to feel like a memory of something that once made sense, but now felt foreign? Alex would be here in less than 24 hours. The thought sent a sharp pang through her chest. Not just guilt, but fear. Fear of what she might see in his eyes when he looked at her. Would he recognize the change in her? Would he sense that something had shifted, that a part of her no longer belonged to him? Lucas watched her with quiet intensity, his hand still resting over hers. "You don't have to decide right now," he said, but they both knew that wasn't true. Time was running out. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her small rented apartment, staring at the ceiling as the sounds of Barcelona filtered through the open window. The hum of distant voices, the occasional burst of laughter, the steady rhythm of the city she had come to love. She thought about Alex, about the way he had once made her feel safe, certain. She thought about Lucas, about the way he made her feel seen, desired. Two different versions of herself. Two different lives. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Alex. Can't wait to see you, Em. She hesitated before typing back. Me too. A lie. Or maybe just a half-truth. The next afternoon, she found herself at the airport, standing near the arrival's gate, her stomach in knots. People streamed past her, reuniting with loved ones, the air thick with greetings and embraces. Then she saw him. Alex looked almost the same, familiar, solid, dependable. But when his eyes met hers, something flickered in his expression, something unreadable. She forced a smile as he wrapped his arms around her, but it didn't feel the way it used to. You look different, he murmured, pulling back slightly to study her face. Emma swallowed. It's the Barcelona air. He smiled, but there was hesitation behind it. I missed you. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looped her arms around his neck, pressing herself against him as if that could make her feel something. Something other than the quiet ache of knowing that this moment should feel more than it did. And then, just over Alex's shoulder, she saw him. Lucas, standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable, his hands in his pockets. Their eyes locked. A silent conversation passed between them, one filled with everything left unsaid. This was it, the moment of truth. What would she choose? Emma's breath caught in her throat. The airport around her buzzed with noise, laughter, hurried footsteps, the sound of luggage wheels dragging across the floor. But all she could focus on was Lucas. His gaze held hers, unreadable but heavy, as if he was silently asking her what she was going to do. She forced herself to look away, back at Alex. He was smiling at her, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Guilt coiled in her stomach like a snake. I have a surprise for you, Alex said, his voice warm, familiar. I booked us a hotel by the beach. I thought we could spend a few days, just the two of us, before you show me around. Emma nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Lucas was still standing there. Why? Why hadn't he walked away? Did he want her to say something? Did she wanna? Her heart pounded as Alex reached for her suitcase, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Then Lucas did something unexpected. He turned and walked toward the exit. No words. No bouvier. Just a single, deliberate glance over his shoulder before disappearing into the crowd. A challenge. A test. Emma felt like she was suffocating. You okay? Alex's voice was gentle, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes now, like he could sense that something was off. She forced a smile. Yeah, just tired from all the traveling. But she knew this wasn't over. That night, the hotel room was perfect, too perfect. A balcony overlooking the sea, crisp white sheets, the sound of waves crashing outside. It should have felt romantic. It should have felt right. Instead, Emma felt like she was playing a role she no longer knew how to perform. Alex kissed her, slow and familiar, his hands tracing the same paths they always had. But her body wasn't responding the way it should. Her mind was somewhere else, on someone else. She pulled away. I just need some air, she whispered, slipping out onto the balcony before he could ask questions. The night was warm, the city alive beneath her. And then, as if the universe itself was pulling her in the wrong direction, she saw him. Lucas, down on the street, leaning against a lamppost, looking up at her. A shiver ran through her. Had he been waiting for her? Had he known she would come outside? Her pulse raced as she glanced back at the hotel room. Alex was inside, unaware. She turned back to Lucas. He lifted his hand, just slightly, a silent invitation. Emma's heart pounded. This was it. A choice. Stay in the safety of the life she had built, or step into the unknown, into the fire that was already consuming her from the inside out. Her fingers tightened around the railing. What the hell was she going to do? Emma gripped the cold railing of the balcony, her knuckles turning white. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, heavier than the humid Barcelona air. Lucas was still there, watching, waiting. Her heart pounded against her ribs. This wasn't just some careless flirtation anymore. This was a decision, a line she either stepped over or walked away from forever. Behind her, Alex moved inside the hotel room, unaware of the war raging in her chest. He was here because he loved her, because he believed in them. But did she? She took a deep breath, forcing herself to turn away from the street. She had to stop this, whatever this was. Then her phone vibrated in her hand. A message. From Lucas. Meet me. 5 minutes. Same cafe. Her pulse spiked. That small, tucked-away cafe where they had first met. Where everything had started. No, she couldn't. Could she? She swallowed hard, then typed back. I can't. Her response came instantly. Then why are you still looking for me? Emma's breath hitched. She hadn't even realized it. Her body had turned back toward the street. Her eyes had already locked onto him again. A choice. A mistake. A risk. She exhaled sharply, then turned back inside. Alex was already in bed, scrolling through his phone, his face lit by the glow of the screen. He looked up and smiled at her, completely oblivious to the storm inside her. Come here, he murmured, patting the space beside him. Emma hesitated. Then, almost mechanically, she slid into bed next to him, curling her body close. She willed herself to relax, to let his warmth ground her, to remind herself that this was where she belonged. But her mind refused to cooperate. The minutes ticked by. She closed her eyes, but all she could see was Lucas standing under that streetlight, waiting. And then, before she could stop herself, she was slipping out of bed. She barely heard Alex stir as she grabbed her jacket and her phone. She moved in a trance, heart hammering, thoughts a blur. The hotel door closed softly behind her, the hallway eerily silent. By the time she reached the street, Lucas was already gone. Panic surged through her. She turned wildly, scanning the sidewalk, searching, until she spotted him. A block away, walking slowly, as if he knew she would follow. And she did. The streets were quiet, the city glowing in the warm haze of streetlights. Her breath came fast, her body humming with adrenaline. Lucas never looked back. He didn't need to. He knew she was coming. When they reached the cafe, he finally stopped, turning to face her. You said you couldn't come, he murmured, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. Emma's throat was dry. I lied. A slow, knowing smile curved his lips. I know. She opened her mouth to speak, but he was already moving, stepping into her space, his scent, coffee, and something distinctly him, wrapping around her like a drug. This is dangerous, she whispered. Lucas reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Then tell me to stop. Silence stretched between them. Emma's hands clenched at her sides. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to go back to Alex, to pretend this night had never happened. But her heart had already made its choice. And when Lucas leaned in, when his lips finally met hers, she knew. There was no turning back now. The moment Lucas's lips touched hers, the rest of the world fell away. Emma had spent years chasing stability, telling herself that love was about comfort, about growing together, about routine. But this was fire. It was reckless and raw, an unraveling of every careful thread she had stitched around her life. Lucas's hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and she let him. She let herself fall. The kiss deepened, slow but insistent, a silent confession of every unspoken thought, every stolen glance, every night she had spent lying awake, wondering what it would feel like. Now she knew, and it was dangerous. When they finally broke apart, Emma's breath was shaky. Lucas studied her, his gaze burning, waiting for her to say something, to stop this before it went too far. But it was already too far. I shouldn't be here, she whispered, but even as she said it, her fingers curled into the fabric of his jacket, holding on. Lucas smirked, but there was something softer behind it. Then why are you? She didn't have an answer. The street was quiet around them, the distant hum of the city fading into background noise. Somewhere, a church bell chimed, marking the hour. Alex. The name hit her like a slap. He was back at the hotel, waiting for her, trusting her. Emma took a step back, her breath unsteady. I have to go. Lucas's jaw tensed, but he nodded. I won't stop you. That was the problem. She wanted him to. She turned, walking away before she lost what little control she had left. Each step felt like a battle between the life she had and the one she might have if she just let herself fall. But when she reached the hotel, guilt clamped around her like a vice. The room was dark when she slipped inside, the only light coming from the moon spilling through the curtains. Alex was asleep, peaceful, unaware. Emma stood at the edge of the bed, staring at him. He was safe, predictable. He had been her home for 5 years. Then why did she feel like a stranger in this room? She climbed into bed beside him, but sleep didn't come. And when her phone vibrated on the nightstand, she didn't have to look to know who it was. "Lucas, tell me this isn't real. Tell me you don't feel it." Her hands trembled as she typed back. "Emma, I can't." A pause. Then, "Lucas, then meet me tomorrow." She squeezed her eyes shut. One choice, one decision, and her entire life would change. Emma barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lucas, his smirk, his touch, the way he had looked at her like she was something he wasn't willing to let slip away. And then she saw Alex, the way he had trusted her, the way he had flown across an ocean to be with her. By morning, her mind was a battlefield. She rolled on her side and found Alex still asleep, his chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. The familiar sight should have brought her comfort, but instead, it made her feel like an intruder in her own life. Her phone buzzed. "Lucas, 10 Uhr morgens. Meet me at the bookstore." That bookstore, the one tucked away in an alley, where the dust smelled like forgotten stories and the world outside didn't exist. The place where Lucas had first told her, "You don't just read books. You live them." Emma stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She should say no. She should block his number, erase every trace of him, and pour herself back into the life she had built with Alex. But her fingers were already moving. "Emma, I can't promise anything." Her response came almost immediately. "Lucas, I don't need promises. Just you." A shiver ran through her. She slipped out of bed as quietly as she could, grabbed a jacket, and left the hotel before she could change her mind. The bookstore. The bell above the door chimed softly as Emma stepped inside. The smell of aged pages wrapped around her like a memory, comforting and suffocating at the same time. Lucas was already there, leaning against a bookshelf, flipping absent-mindedly through a worn novel. When he saw her, his lips curved into that knowing smirk. "You came." Emma swallowed. "I shouldn't have. But you did." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Lucas, I know." He cut her off gently, closing the book and placing it back on the shelf. "You don't have to explain." Yes, she did. She had to explain to herself why she had chosen to be here when every rational part of her screamed that this was a mistake. Lucas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I just needed to see you. One last time, if that's what you want." Her breath hitched. Was that what she wanted? One last time. A clean break. A goodbye. But as she looked up into his dark eyes, filled with a silent challenge, she knew this wasn't ending here. Lucas reached for her hand, tracing his fingers over her palm like he was memorizing the shape of her. "Tell me you don't feel it," he murmured. "Tell me you don't want more." Emma's throat was dry. She could lie. She could walk away. Or she could do the one thing that terrified her more than anything. Tell the truth. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, the bookstore door swung open behind them. A rush of cold air. A familiar voice. "Emma." Her blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, dread sinking into her stomach. Alex stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his eyes flicking between her and Lucas. Realization dawned. He knew, and just like that, the fragile illusion shattered. "Ви сказали. Продовжуй дада інтриги та щоб слухач був в зацікавленні. Програма ChatGPT підсказала." Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs as she locked eyes with Alex. He stood frozen in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his posture told her everything. He wasn't just confused. He knew. Lucas tensed beside her, his fingers slipping away from her palm as if he already understood how this was going to end. The three of them stood in a quiet, forgotten bookstore in the heart of Barcelona, caught in a moment that could never be undone. Alex's voice was calm, too calm. So this is why you needed air last night. Emma opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Say something. Fix this. But how do you fix something that was never meant to stay whole? Lucas finally spoke, his tone even careful. You should give her a chance to explain. Alex let out a dry, bitter laugh. Explain what? That she's been sneaking around behind my back? That she flew across the world to find herself, and instead found you? He shook his head, his eyes dark with something between anger and heartbreak. Damn it, Emma. I trusted you. Guilt sliced through her like a knife. She had been preparing for this moment in the back of her mind, but no amount of preparation made it easier to watch someone you once loved look at you like a stranger. I didn't plan for this, she whispered, her voice barely steady. Alex exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. But you let it happen. Emma swallowed hard. I didn't mean to hurt you. He let out a hollow laugh. Yeah? Well, congratulations, because you did. A thick, unbearable silence settled between them. Lucas shifted beside her. Maybe this isn't the best place for this conversation. Alex's gaze snapped to him, sharp and accusing. And you what? You just couldn't help yourself? Couldn't stay away from someone who was already taken? Lucas met his glare without flinching. She's not something to be taken. His voice was low, controlled. And maybe you should be asking yourself why she had to come all the way here to remember what it's like to feel alive. Emma inhaled sharply. Alex's jaw clenched. He turned back to her, his expression shifting from anger to something more painful, something raw and broken. Is that true? His voice cracked slightly. Is that why you left? Emma's throat burned. She couldn't lie. Not anymore. I don't know who I am with you anymore, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I came here I could fix us. But all I did was realize how lost I already was. Alex stared at her for a long moment, as if searching for the girl he thought he knew. But whatever he saw in her eyes, it made something in him break. He nodded once. A small, resigned motion. I see. The ache in his voice was unbearable. I'm sorry, she said again, but this time it felt empty. Apologies wouldn't undo what had been done. Alex let out a slow breath, straightening. I should go. Emma's stomach twisted. Alex, but he was already backing away, already reaching for the door. He looked at her one last time, as if memorizing the version of her that still belonged to him. Then he was gone. The door swung shut behind him. The moment he left, the air inside the bookstore felt suffocating. Emma pressed a hand to her chest, struggling to breathe past the weight of everything she had just lost. Lucas stood beside her, silent, watching her carefully. She turned to him, her voice hoarse. What did I just do? Lucas's gaze softened, but he didn't answer. He didn't have to. She had made a choice. Now she had to live with it. Emma stood in the empty bookstore, her pulse still racing, the echoes of Alex's footsteps lingering like ghosts in the air. This was it. She had crossed the line. No more illusions. No more pretending she could balance on the edge forever. Lucas exhaled beside her, his presence steady but unreadable. Are you okay? Was she? She wasn't sure. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her. But beneath the guilt and the ache, something else flickered, relief. The kind that came with finally telling the truth, even when it destroyed everything. I don't know, she admitted. Lucas nodded, as if he understood. Come on. She frowned. Where? His lips curled slightly, a glimmer of something unreadable in his expression. You look like you need a drink. A rooftop in Barcelona. An hour later, Emma found herself on a rooftop bar overlooking the glowing city. Below, Barcelona pulsed with life, music, laughter, the hum of people who weren't drowning in their own choices. Lucas handed her a glass of wine and leaned against the ledge beside her, watching her carefully. He hadn't pushed her to talk. He hadn't told her she had made the right choice or the wrong one. He had just brought her here, let her breathe. Finally, he spoke. Do you regret it? Emma swirled the wine in her glass, staring at the deep red liquid like it held the answer. I don't know. She looked at him. Should I? Lucas's smirk was slow, almost knowing. Regret is a funny thing. She raised a brow. That's not an answer. He took a sip of his drink before setting it down. I think the real question is, what now? Her stomach twisted. That was the question, wasn't it? What now? What did you do after you tore your life apart? Her phone buzzed on the table. Her heart lurched. Alex. She hesitated before picking it up, her pulse pounding in her ears as she read the message. Alex, I'm flying home tomorrow. Don't worry. I won't ask you to come back with me. But I need to see you before I go. Emma swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the phone. Lucas watched her reaction, his expression unreadable. She nodded slowly. He studied her for a moment, then leaned back, his gaze shifting to the city lights. So, are you going? She didn't answer right away. The smart thing, the easiest thing, would be to say no, to let Alex leave, let the past dissolve into the distance. But was she ready to walk away forever? Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her glass down. I don't know. Lucas exhaled, his gaze flickering with something unreadable. Then I guess you have until tomorrow to figure it out. The goodbye that wasn't meant to happen. The next morning, Emma stood outside a quiet cafe, her heart in her throat as she spotted Alex sitting at a table near the window. She could still turn around. She could pretend she had never seen the message. But she had come here for a reason. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. Alex looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. He looked tired, more tired than she had ever seen him. She slid into the chair across from him. Hey, he let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. Hey, for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. I wasn't planning on coming here, just to fight. I needed to see you. One last time. Her stomach twisted. Alex, he held up a hand. No, let me just say this. She swallowed, nodding. I loved you, Emma. Hell, maybe I still do. His voice was quiet, raw. But I think I knew, deep down, that I was losing you before you ever got on that plane. Emma's breath hitched. You weren't. He gave her a look, and she fell silent. I don't hate you, he continued. I don't even think I'm mad anymore. I wish you'd told me the truth sooner. Emma blinked back, the sting in her eyes. I didn't know how. Alex nodded slowly, then exhaled, pushing back his chair. I have to go. She stood with him, her chest tight. Alex. He hesitated. Then for the first time since she had broken him, he smiled, soft, sad. Take care of yourself, Emma. And then he was gone. She stood there for a long time, the echoes of his words settling deep inside her. When she finally stepped outside, the sun was too bright, the city too alive for how empty she felt. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. Lucas, so? Did you figure out? Emma stared at the screen. Maybe she had. Or maybe the Real journey was just beginning. A choice that was never simple. Emma stood outside the cafe, the warmth of the Barcelona sun pressing against her skin, but she felt cold inside. She had expected closure, maybe even relief. Instead, there was only emptiness, a strange, hollow ache that made her question whether she had really found herself or just destroyed everything without knowing what came next. Her phone buzzed again. Lucas, I'll be at the pier. If you come, I'll know what it means. If you don't, well, then I guess I'll have my answer. Her breath hitched. This was it. Another crossroads. She should have felt free, unburdened. But instead, the weight of the choice crushed her. Did she run toward the fire that was Lucas, toward the reckless, intoxicating thrill of the unknown? Or did she take the time to figure out who she was without needing another man to define her? Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she slipped her phone into her pocket and started walking. The pier. By the time Emma reached the water, the sun was starting to dip, casting a golden hue over the restless waves. The wind carried the scent of salt and something bittersweet, like endings and beginnings all at once. Lucas was there, leaning against the railing, watching the horizon. He didn't turn around when she approached, but she knew he felt her presence. So, he murmured, you came. Emma hesitated. I don't know what I'm doing. Lucas finally looked at her, his dark eyes searching hers. That's okay. She let out a shaky breath. No, it's not. I keep making choices without knowing where they lead. He smirked slightly. That's called living. She let out a dry laugh. Is it? Or am I just running? Lucas studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to the sea. You know, the first time I saw you, I could tell you were trying to escape something. Emma stiffened. You walked into that cafe like you belonged somewhere else. Like your body was here, but your mind was still holding onto something thousands of miles away. He exhaled. I kept waiting for you to realize it. She swallowed hard. And now, he finally faced her fully. Now I think you need to ask yourself one question. She braced herself. What? His voice was soft but firm. If I wasn't standing here, would you still be leaving? The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked past him, out at the water, where the waves crashed endlessly against the shore, not caring about the chaos in her heart. If Lucas wasn't here, if Alex was gone, if it was just her, would she stay? Her heart pounded. Emma realized she already knew the answer. Her fingers clenched around the railing, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady. I need time. Lucas didn't flinch. He didn't push. He just nodded, something flickering behind his eyes. Then take it. His lips curved, but there was a sadness in his smile. But don't take too long. Emma exhaled slowly, the decision settling inside her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't choosing between two men. She was choosing herself. She stepped back, her heart pounding. Goodbye, Lucas. And then, before she could change her mind, she turned and walked away, toward the unknown, toward whatever came next. For once, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward herself. A new beginning, or just another escape. Emma didn't look back. Not at Lucas. Not at the city she had tangled herself in. Not at the choices that had led her here. Her feet carried her away from the pier, from the familiar path she had started carving out with him. For once, she wasn't letting passion or guilt dictate her next move. But as she weaved through the streets of Barcelona, something gnawed at her. A whisper in the back of her mind that asked, was this really your choice? Or were you just afraid of choosing wrong? She shook the thought away and kept walking. 2 days later, the morning was crisp as she sat at a small cafe near Placa de Catalunya, her coffee untouched, her mind restless. She had spent the last 48 hours alone, avoiding Lucas, avoiding anything that could pull her back into the whirlwind of emotions she wasn't ready to face. And yet, she wasn't sure if she had found the clarity she was looking for. A small envelope slid across her table. She looked up, startled. An older woman, the cafe's owner, stood beside her, a knowing smile on her face. A man left this for you earlier, the woman said in a thick Spanish accent. Emma's stomach twisted. Lucas. She hesitated before picking up the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the note inside. I meant it when I said I wouldn't wait forever. You don't owe me anything, Emma. But if you still feel something, if you still wonder, then meet me at Estacio de Franca. 8 p.m. If not, I'll know your answer. No regrets. No what-ifs. Her pulse pounded. He was leaving, and he was giving her one last chance to decide if she was willing to let go completely. She exhaled shakily, staring at the note. The truth was, she did still wonder. She still felt it. But was that enough? She had spent so long being someone else's something. A girlfriend. A lover. A secret. Did she really want to run straight into another version of the same story? The clock ticked past noon. 8 hours. 8 hours to decide if she would run toward him. Or finally, truly, let him go. 8 p.m., the station. Emma stood outside Estacio de Franca, her heart in her throat. The grand station loomed before her, its golden lights casting a glow over the arched ceilings, the hum of travelers filling the space with an energy she couldn't escape. She could still walk away. She could still turn back. She forced herself to take a step inside. Her eyes darted across the station, searching. And then, there he was. Lucas stood near the platform, a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his gaze locked onto hers the second she walked in. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly he smirked. Took you long enough. Emma swallowed hard. I wasn't sure I was coming. Lucas nodded, his expression unreadable. And now. Her heart was pounding, her mind screaming with every reason why this could be another mistake. But maybe mistakes were just another way of finding out what you really wanted. She stepped closer. Lucas studied her, waiting, always waiting for her to make the choice on her own. Emma took a deep breath. And then, the train whistle blew. Last call. Lucas tilted his head, almost amused. Well, Emma's fingers curled into fists. Was she ready? Or was she just afraid of losing him? The final announcement echoed through the station. She had to decide. Now, the choice that changed everything. The train whistle echoed through the station, a sharp, final reminder that time was running out. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as she stood in front of Lucas, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like gravity itself. She had spent weeks searching for answers, chasing feelings, unraveling herself piece by piece in a city that had swallowed her whole. And now she had to choose. Lucas watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. It's now or never, Emma. Her breath hitched. Was she really about to do this? Her entire life, her past with Alex, the mistakes, the passion, the ache of indecision, had led to this moment. She took a step forward. Lucas's lips parted slightly, his breath caught, waiting for her to say it, to take the risk. And then, a loud crack split the air. Emma barely had time to register the sound before Lucas staggered back, his body jolting violently. Her eyes widened. Time slowed. A red stain spread across his shirt. No, 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 no. Lucas blinked in confusion, his body swaying. His fingers brushed against the blood soaking through his clothes, and for a fraction of a second, he looked at Emma as if he was trying to understand. Then he collapsed. Emma screamed. People shouted around her, voices blurred by the ringing in her ears. The crowd erupted into chaos, but all she could see was him. Lucas, lying on the cold station floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps, blood pooling beneath him. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed them against his wound, desperately trying to stop the bleeding. Lucas, stay with me, she begged, her voice breaking. His fingers twitched, reaching for her, but his strength was fading fast. His eyes locked onto hers, desperate, pleading. She couldn't lose him. Not now. Not like this. Somebody call an ambulance, she screamed, but the words felt distant, lost in the blur of panic and sirens wailing in the background. Lucas tried to speak, his lips barely forming words. Emma leaned closer, her heart shattering. What? What is it? His voice was weak, almost gone. You already knew, he whispered. Her breath hitched. Knew what? A flicker of something unreadable passed through his gaze. And then, his hand fell away. His eyes went still. No, she choked out. Lucas, no. But he was gone. And just like that, the choice she had agonized over was made for her. 1 week later, Barcelona felt different now. Empty, silent in all the wrong ways. Emma sat on a quiet rooftop, staring out over the city, trying to piece together what had happened. Who had pulled the trigger? Why? The police had given her nothing but vague theories. Wrong place, wrong time, maybe a robbery gone wrong. But deep down, Emma knew there was more to it. Lucas had been hiding something, and in his final moments, he had tried to tell her. You already knew. The words haunted her, because maybe she had known. Maybe the answers had been in front of her the entire time, buried beneath all the passion and chaos. Maybe she had fallen in love with a man who was never meant to survive this story. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello. A pause. Then a voice, low, unfamiliar, dangerous. You should have left when you had the chance. The line went dead. Emma's blood ran cold. She slowly set the phone down, her hands shaking. The truth wasn't over. Lucas had died with secrets. And now, someone was making sure she never found them. The end, or just the beginning.